Never judge someone by their uniform or job title, because some people have power you can't even imagine. A CEO tried to humiliate a janitor, but standing behind that janitor was one of the most powerful men in America, the FBI director. What happened next became the CEO's biggest regret of his life. The ballroom glittered under the crystal chandeliers as the elite of the business world gathered for the annual Holloway Industries Charity Gala. Everywhere you looked, polished shoes, tailored suits, designer gowns. And at the center of it all stood James Holloway, the towering CEO, dripping with confidence and entitlement. He smiled for cameras, toasted with politicians, and shook hands with billionaires. But tonight, his arrogance would meet its match. Not through a rival CEO. Not through a hostile takeover. Not through the stock market. But through a man most people never even noticed. A man named Marcus Johnson. Marcus Johnson entered the building as he always did, quietly, head held low, wearing his navy blue janitor uniform. He had worked for Holloway Industries for nearly 20 years. Mopping floors. Cleaning bathrooms. Changing light bulbs. To most, he was invisible. To Holloway, he was disposable. But tonight, something felt different. As Marcus pushed his cleaning cart through the marble halls, he glanced up at the grand banners hanging from the ceilings. Holloway Industries, building the future. The hypocrisy stung. Marcus knew better than anyone what this company was really built on. You see, Marcus hadn't always been a janitor. He once served his country. Decorated military veteran. Combat tours overseas. Leadership medals earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. But life doesn't always reward service. After returning home, jobs were scarce. He applied everywhere, humbled but determined. And one day, Holloway Industries offered him a position. Not in management. Not in security. But as a janitor. Marcus took the job, not out of defeat, but out of duty. He had a family to provide for. A young son, Tyler, who looked up to him like a hero. Even if the world didn't see his worth, his son did. And that was enough. For a while. As Marcus polished the marble floors near the ballroom entrance, he heard Holloway's booming laughter echo from the main stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holloway announced into the microphone. "Let us toast, to success, to vision, and to those who keep the lights on, even if it's just by changing the light bulbs." The crowd chuckled politely. Marcus didn't flinch. He was used to being the butt of Holloway's jokes, the invisible man mocked in front of crowds who'd never shake his hand. But as Holloway continued his speech, Marcus noticed something strange. Several men in dark suits, wearing subtle earpieces, quietly weaving through the crowd. They weren't security guards. They were something more. Something federal. And Marcus recognized the posture. Military. Tactical. Purposeful. While Holloway basked under the applause, the agents whispered into their cuffs. The room's energy subtly shifted. High-ranking board members exchanged nervous glances. But Holloway? He remained oblivious. And then it happened. The ballroom doors swung open. In stepped a tall man in a sharp suit, commanding, silent, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Director Samuel Reeves, head of the FBI. The music screeched to a halt. The chatter died instantly. The air turned cold. Even Holloway's grin faltered. "Director Reeves?" Holloway stammered, forcing a smile. "To what do we owe this unexpected pleasure?" Reeves didn't smile. Instead, he raised a single hand, and his agents fanned out. The guests gasped as badges flashed and documents were handed to the stunned board members. Federal warrants. Subpoenas. Indictments. The house of cards was collapsing. Marcus stood quietly by his cart, watching the unfolding chaos with calm eyes. Years of silent suffering were finally being vindicated. Because Marcus knew something very few people in that room understood. This wasn't just business. This wasn't just legal. This was justice. The kind that moves slowly. Quietly. Relentlessly. And justice was here tonight. The chatter had evaporated. The guests froze like statues. The once grand and lavish gala hall now felt like a courtroom, one where silence echoed louder than any gavel. James Holloway, usually brimming with arrogance, now stood stiff, beads of sweat beginning to gather on his temple. His voice wavered slightly as he forced a laugh. "Director Reeves, surely there's been some misunderstanding." But the director didn't flinch. "No misunderstanding, Mr. Holloway." He handed him a thick manila folder. "These are federal charges. Fraud. Embezzlement. Insider trading. Racketeering. You've built your empire on broken laws. And tonight." He paused for a moment, locking eyes with Holloway. "It ends." Months earlier, the FBI began an intensive investigation into Holloway Industries. What they discovered beneath the surface was appalling. Offshore accounts hidden behind fake charities. Political bribes disguised as consulting fees. Insider trades executed moments before public announcements. And contracts with unethical overseas suppliers that violated numerous federal sanctions. But perhaps the worst offense was how Holloway treated his employees, particularly those at the bottom. People like Marcus. Underpaid. Overworked. Humiliated. It wasn't just illegal. It was inhumane. What Holloway never realized was that Marcus, the invisible janitor, had quietly witnessed it all. Cleaning late at night while executives whispered in darkened boardrooms. Emptying trash bins that contained shredded documents. Changing light bulbs while men spoke freely on speakerphones, assuming the janitor was too insignificant to care. But Marcus cared. He documented everything, names, dates, conversations. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he believed in something greater. He believed the truth would one day matter. He believed that dignity was stronger than power. One evening, after months of silent observation, Marcus gathered his notes and evidence. He didn't call a journalist. He didn't post it online. He didn't try to go viral. He reached out to an old friend from his military days, someone who now worked in federal law enforcement. Within 48 hours, Marcus was sitting in a secure location with federal agents, laying out years of evidence. The FBI couldn't believe what they were hearing. An anonymous janitor had built a case stronger than many of their own agents. They verified every detail. The investigation began. The noose tightened. And tonight, at the gala, the trap had finally sprung. Director Reeves continued speaking as cameras flashed and murmurs spread like wildfire. "Your arrogance blinded you, Mr. Holloway. You thought no one beneath you was paying attention." The agents moved closer. Holloway's attorney, standing beside him, whispered frantically, but even he looked pale. "Director, perhaps we could discuss." Reeves cut him off with a raised hand. "You can save your defense for court." One by one, federal agents began escorting board members and executives out of the ballroom. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Guests whispered among themselves, many too afraid to speak above a murmur. "I heard his offshore accounts were massive. They say he bribed 3 senators. All that charity work was a front." Suddenly, the elite were remembering how cruel Holloway had been to so many, firing people without cause, destroying competitors, belittling employees publicly. But no one dared to speak up, until Marcus did. Not with shouts. Not with protests. But with quiet, calculated courage. Finally, Holloway turned. His eyes landed on Marcus standing by his cart. For the first time in years, he really saw him. "You," Holloway hissed. "You did this?" Marcus didn't raise his voice. He simply met Holloway's glare with steady, unshaken eyes. "I told you once, sir," Marcus said calmly. "No man stays above the law forever." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. An agent approached. "James Holloway, you are under arrest for multiple federal offenses. You have the right to remain silent." As Holloway's wrists were cuffed, the crowd collectively exhaled. The king had fallen. But even then, Marcus remained still, dignified. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply watched justice take its course. Because real strength isn't loud. It's patient. By morning, every major news outlet was running the story. Billionaire CEO arrested in FBI sting, janitor turns whistleblower. Reporters swarmed outside Holloway Industries headquarters. Social media exploded. Talk shows debated the case. The public was stunned, not just at the crimes, but at who brought him down. During a press conference, Director Reeves addressed the nation. "This case reminds us that sometimes, the most unlikely citizen becomes the strongest voice for justice." Mr. Johnson's courage and integrity set an example, not just for his company, but for the entire country. The cameras flashed. Reporters nodded. Marcus watched quietly from home, holding his son's hand. He never sought fame. He only wanted the truth to matter. And it did. In boardrooms across the nation, CEOs whispered about Holloway's downfall. Some feared being next. Others reflected on their own treatment of employees. Because that night exposed more than one corrupt man, it revealed a truth many had forgotten. Power doesn't define worth. Character does. And sometimes, the janitor cleaning your office might be the very man who holds the future of your empire in his hands. The office building had started to hum again after the small commotion earlier. Employees were returning to their desks, trying to focus on their spreadsheets, presentations, and endless emails. But the tension hadn't fully left. Whispers circulated through the cubicles about what had happened downstairs between Mr. Calhoun and Marcus. Some employees were careful, speaking only in hushed tones, while others simply exchanged wide-eyed glances, unsure how to process the scene they just witnessed. Marcus, however, went back to work as if nothing had happened. He picked up his cleaning supplies, his mop and bucket, and resumed his rounds. Not because he had to, but because that was who he was. Focused. Disciplined. Professional. The whispers didn't concern him. The stares didn't break him. He knew that real strength wasn't in reacting, but in remaining grounded when others tried to tear you down. Down the hall, behind closed doors, Mr. Calhoun was fuming. His pride had been wounded, and men like him didn't handle humiliation well. Especially not from someone he considered beneath him. "Who does that janitor think he is?" Calhoun barked to his assistant, Lisa. Lisa, ever the professional, simply responded, "I believe his name is Marcus, sir." Calhoun scoffed, pacing back and forth like a caged lion. "Marcus, huh? Well, Marcus just made a very big mistake." His eyes narrowed, burning with a toxic mix of arrogance and rage. "Nobody talks back to me like that. I don't care if the FBI direct himself was watching, you don't disrespect me in my building." Lisa bit her lip but said nothing. She knew better than to fuel his fire. But deep inside, even she felt something different today. There was a shift. The usual power dynamics had been rattled. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his shift. Every room he entered, people fell silent. Some out of guilt, others out of awe. But Marcus kept his head high, his steps steady. He didn't let their eyes control his emotions. He knew that his dignity remained intact. Every swipe of the mop was like meditation. Every garbage bag tied was a reminder that work, no matter how big or small, carried honor when done with integrity. But unknown to Marcus, something much bigger was happening behind the scenes. At that very moment, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the company's private parking lot. Inside sat Director Samuel Bryant, the man who had quietly witnessed the confrontation earlier that morning. Beside him sat his chief of staff, Agent Reynolds. "Sir, are you sure you want to handle this personally?" Reynolds asked. Bryant didn't look away from the windshield. His voice was calm, but firm. "Yes, Reynolds. Some lessons carry more weight when delivered face-to-face." As the SUV came to a stop, the security guard outside immediately recognized the government plates and rushed to open the door. "Director Bryant, welcome," the guard said nervously. Bryant gave a small nod, his tall frame stepping out into the sunlight. He was a man whose presence filled every room he entered, not through intimidation, but through quiet authority. Without waiting, he made his way into the building. Inside, Calhoun was still raging, pacing circles in his office when Lisa's intercom buzzed. "Sir. Director Bryant is here to see you." The color drained from Calhoun's face. He straightened his tie, trying to compose himself. "Send him in." The door opened, and Bryant stepped inside. His eyes swept the office, but there was no warmth in his gaze. "Mr. Calhoun," Bryant began, his voice deep and steady. "Director Bryant, what an unexpected pleasure," Calhoun stammered, extending his hand. Bryant simply looked at the hand but did not shake it. Calhoun awkwardly lowered it. Bryant continued, "I was in your building earlier today for an unrelated meeting. Unfortunately, I witnessed an incident that deeply concerns me." Calhoun tried to maintain his composure. "Ah, you mean that misunderstanding with the janitor? That was simply a small disciplinary matter. I've already taken steps to ensure it won't happen again." Bryant's expression hardened. "I'm not here for your version of the event, Mr. Calhoun. I saw everything." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Bryant continued, "That man you attempted to humiliate, Marcus, is not just your employee. He is a decorated veteran. A man who has served this country with honor far beyond anything your boardroom has ever demanded of you." Calhoun's lips tightened. "And let me remind you," Bryant said, stepping closer, "that men like Marcus fought to protect the very freedoms that allow you to sit in that chair." Calhoun swallowed hard, but before he could reply, Bryant's voice dropped even lower. "I'm here today to deliver a message. Not as a government official. Not as the FBI director. But as a man who believes that leadership is measured not by power, but by how you treat those who have none." Calhoun's mask of arrogance began to crumble. Bryant continued, "Effective immediately, a formal complaint has been filed regarding your conduct. Your board will receive it shortly. Your shareholders will be informed. And your sponsors, well, let's just say many of them share my values." Calhoun's face flushed a deep red. "Director Bryant, please." But Bryant raised his hand. "This is not a negotiation." Silence filled the room. Finally, Bryant leaned in slightly and said, "The man you mocked has more character in his silence than you have displayed in your entire career." With that, Bryant turned and walked out, leaving Calhoun frozen, his world beginning to collapse around him. As Bryant exited the office, Marcus was down the hall, wiping a window. Their eyes met. Bryant gave a simple, respectful nod. Marcus nodded back, no words needed. Two men who understood each other perfectly. The sun had started to set, casting long orange shadows across the glass walls of the corporate building. The tension inside was thicker than ever. Whispers flew through every department like wildfire. The FBI director was here. He confronted Calhoun himself. People who normally turned a blind eye to injustice suddenly found themselves talking about integrity, about dignity, about the quiet janitor who had become the center of an event no one would forget. In the break room, a small group of employees gathered, nervously sipping coffee, speaking in low voices. "Did you see Marcus today?" one woman asked. Another nodded. "Yeah, he walked past my desk after everything. Same as always. Calm. Like nothing happened." A third chimed in, "It's crazy, you know. We've all seen Calhoun's temper. But Marcus stood there, didn't even flinch." And then, the director. "My God." Their voices dropped as Marcus entered quietly to refill his mop bucket. He offered a polite nod but said nothing. The room fell completely silent. Respect filled the air like never before. This time, nobody looked at Marcus with condescension. No fake smiles. No forced politeness. Just genuine, raw respect. The man they had once overlooked was now impossible to ignore. But Marcus wasn't doing it for the recognition. He had never cared for attention. His posture, his work ethic, his calm demeanor, they were not acts of pride. They were the result of years of discipline, of lessons learned through life's harshest storms. As he returned to his duties, Marcus's mind briefly wandered. Images from his past flashed through his thoughts. He remembered being 18, stepping onto the battlefield for the first time. The blinding sun in Afghanistan. The whirring sounds of choppers overhead. The crackle of radios. The weight of responsibility heavier than any combat gear. He had been the youngest in his unit. But even then, his commanding officer had seen something in him. Quiet strength. Steady resolve. Drayton, his sergeant had once said, "You don't lead by shouting. You lead by standing firm when everything around you falls apart." That wisdom had never left him. After returning home, life hadn't offered him parades or fanfare. Like many veterans, he found himself navigating a world that didn't fully appreciate the sacrifices made for its freedoms. Job interviews turned into dead ends. Promises of opportunities dissolved into polite rejections. But he never allowed bitterness to take root. Instead, he accepted the janitorial job at Calhoun Enterprises. Not because it was his dream job, but because it was honest work. Because every dollar earned with integrity carried more weight than any ill-gotten wealth. And today, that same humility had brought him face to face with a moment few ever encounter, the rare collision of dignity and injustice. Back upstairs, Calhoun sat alone in his massive office. The once mighty CEO now stared blankly at his desk. His cell phone buzzed every few minutes, shareholders, board members, attorneys, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. His empire was crumbling. A knock on the door broke his daze. It was Lisa. "Mr. Calhoun, the board has called an emergency meeting. They expect you in the conference room now." His stomach twisted into knots, but he nodded. "I'll be right there." Minutes later, Calhoun entered the large, glass-walled boardroom. The atmosphere was icy. The board members, usually so accommodating, sat stiffly. Their eyes betrayed their disappointment. "Richard," the chairman began, "we've reviewed Director Bryant's official complaint, along with multiple witness accounts from staff members." Calhoun tried to respond, but the chairman raised a hand. "We're not here for your defense. The evidence is overwhelming." He continued, "Your actions today have jeopardized not only our reputation but our government contracts, our stock value, and our public standing." Calhoun's voice cracked. "It was a misunderstanding." "No," another board member cut in sharply. "It was abuse of power. Disrespect. And as of now, Richard, you are suspended indefinitely pending final dismissal procedures." Calhoun's face drained of color. The chairman leaned forward. "You were entrusted with leading this company. Instead, you led it into shame. Leave your badge and company phone on the table." The room went silent. With trembling hands, Calhoun removed his security badge, his phone, and set them down. He stood, eyes hollow, and exited the room. For the first time in his career, Richard Calhoun had no one left to intimidate. No power to wield. No control. As he walked through the office halls, the same employees who once bowed under his gaze now watched him with quiet judgment. The whispers that once celebrated his power now whispered his downfall. He passed Marcus near the lobby. The two locked eyes for a brief moment. Calhoun's lips trembled. He wanted to say something, perhaps an apology, perhaps an excuse, but no words came. Marcus simply nodded once. Not in arrogance. Not in victory. But in acknowledgement. Because true strength never requires revenge. It stands firm even when others fall. Outside, Director Bryant was still speaking with federal agents in dark suits. Reporters had begun gathering near the entrance, their cameras rolling, sensing the gravity of the moment. As Calhoun was escorted to his car by security, the cameras flashed. His disgrace was now public. Marcus quietly continued his work inside. Hours later, as the office emptied and the night shift took over, Marcus finally clocked out. The quiet click of his time card was the sound of a man who had carried himself with honor. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, Director Bryant stood waiting by his SUV. Bryant smiled. "Evening, Marcus." Marcus offered a respectful nod. "Director." The two men stood face to face, two warriors from different battlefields who understood each other without needing many words. "You handled yourself with great dignity today," Bryant said. "Just did what I always do," Marcus replied humbly. Bryant's eyes twinkled. "The world saw a janitor today, but I saw something far greater, a leader." Marcus allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Appreciate that, sir." Bryant stepped forward. "There's something else. My office has openings, leadership roles overseeing facility operations for several of our federal buildings. We need men of integrity. Veterans who understand discipline, loyalty, and quiet strength." Marcus's eyes widened slightly, but he remained composed. "Are you offering me a position?" Bryant nodded. "You've earned it." For a moment, Marcus said nothing. The weight of the moment was heavy, but not overwhelming. Finally, he extended his hand. "I accept." Bryant shook his hand firmly. "Welcome aboard." As they walked toward the SUV together, Bryant added, "Sometimes, Marcus, the world needs to be reminded that titles don't make the man, character does." Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. That's something my father taught me long ago." The SUV doors closed behind them, and as they drove off, the city lights blurred past, but for Marcus, a new chapter was just beginning. The sun had fully set now, leaving the city awash in a blanket of stars. Marcus sat silently in the back of the SUV, looking out of the window as Director Bryant drove them through the city streets. Neither man spoke for a few minutes. The weight of the day still hung in the air, but it wasn't a burden, it was a release. Bryant finally broke the silence. "You know, Marcus, most men in your position would have lashed out. Fought back. You had every right to." Marcus continued staring out the window, his voice calm, even. "I've seen what anger does to men, sir. It eats at them. It takes away their peace. You don't win battles by losing yourself." Bryant nodded slowly, as if those words confirmed what he already knew. "That's why I want you on my team. Men like you are rare. Men who know when to stand still, and when to move." As they crossed over the river, the city lights reflected on the water like tiny dancing flames. Marcus allowed himself to exhale fully for the first time that day. It wasn't relief, it was clarity. The clarity that comes after standing through the storm and still remaining upright. Bryant glanced at him. "How long did you serve?" 2 tours in Afghanistan. 1 in Iraq. 12 years total, Marcus answered, his voice steady. Bryant gave a respectful nod. And after all that, you ended up mopping floors. Marcus finally turned his gaze to meet Bryant's. Work is work, Director. A man's dignity isn't measured by his job title. It's measured by how he carries himself doing it. Bryant smiled, almost proudly. That's exactly why I need you. They drove in silence for a few more blocks until Bryant pulled into a secured federal facility, an office complex that looked ordinary from the outside, but the armed guards and restricted access signs revealed its true importance. This is where you'll be based, Bryant said, turning off the ignition. Of course, there's paperwork, clearances, but your record speaks for itself. Marcus stepped out, looking up at the tall building, its flag waving proudly in the night wind. I won't let you down. Bryant placed a firm hand on his shoulder. I know. Inside, Marcus was given a brief tour by another agent. The facility was pristine, secure, efficient, and disciplined. Everything operated on schedule, every corner spotless, every person respectful. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was a role that required trust. And trust was something Marcus had earned. As they walked down the main corridor, the agent leading him paused. By the way, there's someone who's been waiting to meet you. Marcus raised a brow. Oh. The agent opened a conference room door, revealing an older man sitting inside, military haircut, sharp eyes, posture like steel even in his advanced age. He stood as Marcus entered. Colonel Reed? Marcus said, stunned. The older man smiled wide. Drayton. It's been a long time. Marcus immediately straightened and saluted. Sir. At ease, soldier, Reed chuckled. I heard what happened today. I'm proud of you. Marcus's voice softened. Thank you, sir. Reed stepped closer. See, I told them back then, you had something special in you. You didn't need to yell to command respect. You didn't need rank to be a leader. Marcus swallowed, emotion swelling but controlled. The colonel continued, that company didn't deserve you. But you handled yourself like a man. Like a soldier. And now, you're where you belong. Marcus nodded firmly. I'm ready to serve, sir. In any capacity. Reed smiled. I know you are. And Marcus, this position, it's just the beginning. The two men shook hands, a bond of soldier and commander, of mutual respect that no amount of corporate power games could replicate. Meanwhile, back at Calhoun Enterprises, the fallout was spreading like wildfire. News outlets had caught wind of the incident. Headlines flashed across TV screens. CEO humiliates janitor, disciplined by FBI director. Corporate power abuse caught on camera. Silent dignity of veteran janitor exposes CEO's arrogance. The story went viral overnight. Talk shows debated it. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #RespectMarcus and #RealStrength trended globally. Employees who once barely noticed Marcus now shared stories of his quiet kindness, how he would fix broken vending machines, how he would mop the floors during lunch so no one slipped, how he once stayed late to help a young intern whose car wouldn't start. Marcus had become a symbol of quiet integrity, of what real strength looks like in a world obsessed with titles. Former soldiers, veterans organizations, even political leaders began publicly praising his composure. He embodies the kind of leadership we rarely see today, one anchor said. The kind that refuses to bow to arrogance, yet never stoops to its level. At Calhoun's mansion, Richard sat alone, his empire in ruins. The board had officially removed him from his CEO position. Lawsuits loomed. Government contracts were cancelled. He flipped through the channels, each one telling his downfall. His face was plastered everywhere, but not as a titan of industry. As a cautionary tale. His phone buzzed again. Another attorney. Another lawsuit. Another reminder of how far he had fallen. And somewhere deep in his gut, he knew, this wasn't just about what he did that day. It was about the man he had become over years. The disrespect, the entitlement, the unchecked ego. For the first time in decades, Richard Calhoun felt something unfamiliar: shame. He glanced at a photo on his desk, a younger version of himself breaking ground on the first Calhoun Enterprises building. Back then, he had dreamed of building something great. Somewhere along the line, he had built only for himself, and lost everything that mattered. The next morning, Marcus reported for his first day at his new federal position. His uniform was crisp, his shoes polished. The American flag patch on his shoulder glinted as he walked through the secure doors. Staff members greeted him with genuine respect. Not because of viral videos, but because of the man he was. Director Bryant approached him as they entered the operations wing. "You'll oversee facility security, maintenance coordination, and emergency response readiness. It's an important role." Marcus nodded. "I'm ready." Bryant smiled. "You've always been ready." As the doors closed behind them, Marcus stepped into his new office, simple but dignified. An American flag stood proudly in the corner. His nameplate gleamed on the desk. Marcus Drayton, Director of Facility Operations. He ran his fingers across the plate for a moment, not out of pride, but as a reminder of the journey. Every floor mopped. Every insult endured. Every moment of holding his peace had led to this. His father's words echoed softly in his mind. Real men don't shout to be seen. They stand, and they're never forgotten. And now, as Marcus sat at his desk, the door closed softly behind him. The battle was over. But his real mission, one of quiet leadership, of unwavering dignity, was just beginning. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus Drayton stepped into his new life. But the echoes of that unforgettable day still rippled through the city, the media, and most importantly, within himself. The public had moved on to new headlines. Viral videos faded. But for Marcus, something permanent had shifted. Not just his job. Not just his reputation. Something far deeper. He sat quietly in his modest living room one evening, a hot cup of tea resting on the table beside him. The apartment was small, simple, but peaceful. On the wall, next to his military service photos, hung a newly framed commendation from the FBI. "In recognition of your outstanding composure, dignity, and leadership under adversity." It wasn't the award that mattered. It was what it represented. It was a testament not to a moment of conflict, but to a lifetime of choices. As he sipped his tea, his doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door, and standing there was someone he hadn't seen in years. "Uncle Marcus," the young voice said. It was his niece, Kayla. Her eyes shimmered as she stepped forward, wrapping her arms tightly around him. "I saw everything," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Marcus gently embraced her, patting her back softly. "You didn't have to come all this way, sweetheart." "I had to," she insisted. "You always told me growing up, don't let the world define your worth. I never really understood what you meant until now." She stepped back, wiping a tear from her eye. "You lived it, Uncle Marcus. You showed the whole world." Marcus smiled softly. It's easy to say things when life is simple. But real lessons come when you're tested. Kayla sat down on the couch, pulling out her phone. "Can I show you something?" She scrolled through video after video, tributes, reaction videos, thousands of people who had been moved by his story. Veterans, young men, fathers, workers, all finding hope in his quiet example. One video played, a father recording himself with his teenage son. "This man right here? Marcus Drayton? He's who I want you to look up to, son. Not the ones who scream, or flash money, or chase clout. This is real manhood." Marcus watched, speechless. Kayla smiled through her tears. You gave people something they didn't even know they were looking for. Marcus rubbed his hands together, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to do my job. And that's exactly why you got it, she replied. Later that night, Marcus sat on his small balcony, looking out over the quiet city skyline. The stars above twinkled like distant memories, silent, steady, ancient. His mind drifted back to his parents. His father, who worked double shifts in a steel mill but never complained. His mother, who always taught him. Dignity isn't about being seen. It's about being right when nobody's watching. Those lessons had carried him through war zones, through corporate boardrooms, through humiliations, and ultimately, through redemption. As the cool wind brushed his face, his phone buzzed again. It was a text message from Director Bryant. Clearance approved. Full onboarding complete. Ready for your next assignment when you are. Marcus replied simply. I'm ready. The following morning, Marcus arrived at headquarters early, dressed sharply in his federal uniform. As he walked through the secured doors, agents and staff greeted him respectfully, but not because of his viral fame. Because of who he was. Bryant met him at the entrance to the main operations floor. Big day, Bryant said with a smile. Marcus nodded. Every day is, sir. They walked into the conference room, where a group of federal agents, tactical officers, and senior administrators sat waiting. On the screen was a map displaying a high-level corporate fraud investigation, ironically involving multiple contractors once tied to Calhoun Enterprises. Bryant addressed the room. We're bringing down a network of corruption that's been exploiting federal contracts for years. And Marcus will be leading our facility-level coordination and integrity audits. The room acknowledged him with nods of trust. As Marcus took his seat at the table, he scanned the faces around him. He wasn't here because someone handed him pity. He wasn't a token hire. He had earned every inch of this seat. Bryant concluded, Gentlemen, this isn't just an investigation. It's about restoring public trust. And I couldn't ask for a better man to help lead that charge. The meeting began, but Marcus's mind briefly drifted, not in distraction, but in gratitude. He thought of every insult he had swallowed at Calhoun Enterprises. He thought of every night he mopped those marble floors in silence while arrogant executives strutted by. He thought of Richard Calhoun's smug face that day in the lobby. And he thought of the 6 federal agents who stood behind him in silent unity, men who didn't need to yell to show their strength. That memory wasn't painful, it was empowering. Across town, in a much smaller office than he was once accustomed to, Richard Calhoun sat with his head in his hands. The investigations had fully gutted his empire. His assets frozen, his reputation annihilated, and now even facing criminal charges. His lawyers had stopped calling with good news. His so-called friends had all vanished. The man who once sneered at Marcus for mopping floors now struggled to pay his legal fees. He turned on the television, half hoping to escape reality, but was greeted once again with headlines of his own disgrace. Former CEO faces federal indictment. Richard slumped deeper into his chair, the crushing weight of his downfall fully realized. For the first time, he whispered to no one. I did this to myself. And unlike Marcus, there was no one standing beside him. Weeks later, Marcus stood at a federal award ceremony. Director Bryant presented him with a Distinguished Service Medal for leadership under adversity. As cameras flashed, as applause erupted, Marcus held the medal, but not for show. He thought of the janitor uniform he used to wear. Of the heavy mop bucket he used to push through marble hallways. Of the sneers, the whispers, the indignities. And yet, he never raised his voice. He never lowered his standards. Now, standing on that stage, he carried something far heavier than any medal could capture. The weight of dignity. Bryant leaned over and whispered. You've taught us all a lesson, Marcus. Power isn't in position. It's in principle. Marcus nodded softly. I was just doing my job, sir. No, Marcus, Bryant said, smiling. You were changing the world. As the ceremony ended, Marcus exited into the night air, standing alone under the stars once more. And in that quiet moment, he finally allowed himself a small, private smile. Not because he had defeated Richard Calhoun. Not because of the viral videos. But because he had proven, both to himself and to the world, that true strength doesn't need to shout. Real power doesn't crush others, it lifts people higher by example. And real men don't crumble under humiliation, they stand quietly, and are never forgotten.